Our fathers fasted and conquered. Our fathers fasted and conquered. In this crisis, we need to remember that our fathers conquered. They faced down armies. They faced down Black Death. They faced down armies of Mohammedans, 3 popes, heretical popes, immortal popes, popes with wives, popes with armies. They faced this in so many ways, and they conquered. Our fathers conquered. They shed their blood for the faith. They kept the faith, and they passed it down so that you can save your soul, because now you have the faith. And it's because of the sacrifices of our fathers that you have the faith, and that you can take this faith and save your soul by God's grace. So we need to understand and remember, in this crisis, you may be despondent. Remember our fathers. Remember how they conquered. One of the weapons they used was fasting. Now, the traditional fasting rules in the Great Fast of Lent are these. Originally, there were 6 weeks of Lent, which equaled 36 total days of Lent, but St. Gregory the Great added the observance of Ash Wednesday, which added another 4 days to the already 36 days of fasting. So there were 40 total fasting days. On a fasting day, our fathers took only 1 meal after the hour of noon, which is 3 p.m. They took the 1 meal, and at that 1 meal, there was no meat, no eggs, and no dairy. They were permitted to use fish only. And then on Sunday, they were allowed to take more food so they could eat more than 1 meal per day, but it also abstained from meat and dairy. So there was 44 total days, 40 days plus, or 46, 40 total fasting days plus another 6 Sundays, abstinence from meat and eggs and dairy, and then fasting on all the non-Sundays. This is the fast of our fathers by which they conquered. Now, they mocked and laughed at the Mohammedans because their fast was a feast of whatever you like in the morning while it's dark. The Mohammedans during Ramadan could fast. They could eat, or they could eat whatever they would like in the morning, meat, eggs, dairy. And then their fast was during the light. They could not eat or drink anything, but then they could feast again at night. So in the morning they could feast, at the night they could feast, and they were not abstaining from any particular foods. So our fathers laughed at the Mohammedans as being effeminate and soft because their fast was not very rigorous due to the, without any abstinence from particular foods, which attack the concupiscible appetite, which hungers after meat and dairy because of its fat content, because of its dullness of mind. The concupiscible appetite loves these pleasures of the meat and dairy because it makes us soft and bloated in our concupiscible appetite. So our fathers laughed at the Mohammedans, but over the years the church relaxed, due to our own fallenness and our own effeminacy, the church relaxed these fasting rules more and more. And even at the time of Vatican II, 1960, the current code at that time did permit meat during Lent, except on Fridays, Saturdays, and particular days like Ash Wednesday and the Triduum. But there was still a fasting on the books, so you still had to take 1 meal per day, but you could take the collations twice a day, which were little snacks which could not together equal 1 meal. So the 2 meals, 2 extra snacks between the 1 meal. You could take 2 collations if you needed to, if you were dying of starvation. But, and I mean that lightly, you don't have to actually be dying, but if you need that to fulfill your duties of your state in life, you can take the collations. So, even in 1960, the rules of our fathers were greatly relaxed, and so the mockery that they once spewed upon the Mohammedans was no longer justified because we had relaxed so much and become so soft at that time in 1960. Now, one other factor was World War II, because there was a scarcity of food, and the church relaxed much of the fasting rules, especially during World War II, because of the scarcity of food. So these are these are just causes, of course. But in 1966, Paul VI all but abolished fasting from the church's law. So now there are only 2 days in the entire calendar year where fasting is obligatory, Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. And so those days are required fasting and abstinence from meat, and during Lent, only on Fridays, abstinence. But there is no abstinence from the meat and for the eggs and dairy, and abstinence from meat is also not enjoined on the faithful. So these are the ways that our fathers conquered. They conquered from this rigorous fasting. And how did they conquer? They were overcoming their sensitive appetite, their concupiscible appetite, which under fallen nature is twisted into gluttony and lust. Now, the Mohammedan false religion in particular reinforces gluttony and lust because their very religion teaches them that when they go to their heaven, it is actually a sensible heaven with sensible delights, including lust. The Mohammedans reinforce that, but our Lord was not married. Our Lord is the high priest, the celibate priest, and we overcome these initial vices, gluttony and lust, through the rigor of fasting. And this is how our fathers conquered. If you want to conquer, if you want to overcome this crisis, and you want to overcome your vices, if you want to be a man of God, you must fast. You must fast if you want to conquer. Now, the most important thing to remember, if you are convinced of the necessity of fasting, the virtue of fasting, as we discussed, St. Thomas says it's the virtue of fasting. Fasting is a virtue. The most important thing is to safeguard against immoderate zeal. Now, if you are convinced of the necessity of fasting for your spiritual life, and you want to fast, you want to take on this rigor of our fathers and consider these things, you must guard against immoderate zeal. Immoderate zeal is taking the pious intentions and the generous zeal of a faithful soul, and the devil will take that and say, well, you must immediately take on the rigor of our fathers or else you're not really fasting, which is false. The truth is that you must start slow. If you've never fasted like that before, you need to start slow. So during Lent, practice the basic abstinence you have practiced, but add something little, like add abstinence on Wednesday, or add abstinence on Saturday, or add fasting on Friday. There's not the obligatory fasting on every Friday of Lent. You could add fasting. So start skipping breakfast. Just take 2 meals per day. Or if you can get to 1 meal a day, go to 1 meal. And just start slow. You have to start slow or else you're going to lose it immediately. You're going to do it for 2 days and then you're going to burn out and the devil's going to laugh. So you got to start slow. You got to do one little thing, little by little. And every year in Lent, you add a little bit more until you can fast like our fathers did. Now, another important thing is Paschaltide. So when Easter comes around, if you've gotten a regular virtue of fasting going through Lent, be careful in Paschaltide. You need to feast because it's the feast of feasts. It's not proper that you should be fasting rigorously during Paschaltide, but you should keep some amount of abstinence or moderation, at least on Fridays, so that you don't lose everything, because you can obtain a virtue of fasting during Lent and then lose it during Paschaltide. So keep up some moderation during Paschaltide. So, for example, just abstinence from meat on Fridays. Just keep that going so then you can go back into a regular discipline of fasting during the time after Pentecost. So then in Fridays during Pentecost or after Pentecost, then you can go back into abstinence from meat plus fasting, for example, during the time after Pentecost. So consider these things, brethren. Be careful of immoderate zeal, but take up with zeal the mantle of our fathers. If you wish to conquer, if you wish to be a man of God, take up this weapon and conquer.